Hello Proponomics people, and welcome to the long form explainer video for day 12 of the Proponomics Advent Calendar. And today I'm going to be talking about DCF, NPV and the lifespan of property assets in general. So don't be worried by the jargon, I am going to explain it all. DCF stands for discounted cash flow, and ultimately this is a concept again that is used quite regularly in big business and private equity houses, where they will look at all of the cash flows they're expecting from the life of an investment, in our case a property. So what cash flows would we be expecting? Well, we'd be expecting rents to come in, of course. Unfortunately, we also have to expect cash flows to go out because we might be paying agents to manage it. We're going to be paying insurance. We're also going to be paying agents potentially to look after the property for us. So we're paying for some kind of management fee as well. And we've got to consider all of those and then any other major expenditure there might be. We also may well be thinking, right, we might sell this asset in 10 years' time. So perhaps we're going to get a big lump of cash in then at that point. We also might be refinancing at some point during that cycle. And that might be cash flow into our business, which can be valuable cash flow because apart from anything else, when we refinance, we don't incur a tax liability on that asset. And that can be very powerful indeed. So what's the point of the discounted bit of DCF? Well, discounted simply means it's being brought back to the current value by being discounted by what we call a discount rate. Now that's all well and good, but how do you define what that discount rate should be? Well, you may well use what companies would call their weighted average cost of capital or their weighted average cost of debt. I'm going to explain that for you in another video, so don't be concerned. But ultimately, at a really simple level, let's say you have to pay an investor 10% in order for them to invest money in your property company. So your cost of debt on that debt is 10%. Now, if you borrow the money from a bank instead, you might well be paying at the moment, let's say 5%. So that's your cost of debt. If you were blending those two together across a portfolio, you might then have to say, well, actually 75% of my money comes from the bank, but 25% comes from an investor. And remember, that investor could even be the vendor of a project. But again, don't worry, there'll be another video on vendor financing. So we might blend those two together to work out, and that's why it's called the weighted average cost of our debt or our capital. So we've got the future cash flows, and then we're discounting them by the discount rate to bring it back to the present day. And that brings us to the second metric that I'm discussing in this video, which is net present value. So it really is what it says on the tin. It is the net present, as in we're in the present right now, value of an investment. And what are we looking for when we make investments? We're looking for investments with a positive NPV, a positive net present value. Net present value of more than zero. If it's less than zero, why are we bothering? What's the point? There's no point us investing in things that we think are going to lose us money over time. And this, when you think about it, is the thought process you go through, or it certainly should be, before you are investing in a property asset or indeed making any investment whatsoever. You've got an expectation of getting more money back in the future than you're putting in today. So once the DCF has been run, it will bring us back to that NPV. Now, just because the NPV is 1 or 100 or 100 million or whatever it is, does that mean we should definitely invest in the project? Not necessarily, because like all metrics, NPV and DCF have their limitations. Is there a really big chance this might go wrong? Is this going to finish us off because of the stress of it? Is the NPV good, but really the one major piece of cash flow is in year 18 and we haven't got an 18-year time horizon? So we do need to consider all of these things before we go into an investment. How much money have we got to deploy? There might be 1,000 positive NPV investments, but we might need to pick the top 3. And that is going to come down to risk, reward, effort and time, of course, which again I'll cover in a separate video. So that's DCF and NPV, and we really should be calculating those over the lifespan of a property asset. Now, what do I mean by the lifespan? Ultimately, I mean from the cradle to the grave, from when you buy it to when you sell it. Now, a lot of people might say, well, my exit plan is death. I've heard that a whole number of times over the years from property investors that I've met. Well, guess what then? Death is probably the end of the life cycle of that asset. If it's owned in a limited company, however, that might be a very different kettle of fish, because you may pass away, but it's your shares in the limited company that go to your beneficiaries, and the company goes on and it still owns that asset. And of course, companies can own property and other assets for hundreds of years, and that's one of the beautiful things about companies. So we may be going on so far into the future, you might say, right, my company, my family trust, my children, they're going to control this asset for 100 years. Okay, great. But the point about the discounted cash flow is once we get past a certain number of years in the future cash flows are relatively insignificant. They don't really change anything because of that discounted rate. So we're talking about the lifespan of an asset. And when we talk about the lifespan of an asset, we should also be considering major capital works that are required, of course, because if you're talking about 100 years, presumably at some point in the 100 years, it's going to need a new roof, whatever sort of building that it is. It's definitely going to need some electrical upgrading. We can pretty much guarantee that. It might well need some new windows. There's all sorts of things that might well go on that are more bigger, structural, bigger ticket items. And these should go into your DCFs because it will give you a much truer rate of return on these sorts of assets. Now, you might also use this cash flow forecast to consider, right, I might, for example, have done a deferred consideration deal with a vendor, and I might be paying them some money back in year 5 or year 6. And how am I going to pay them back? I'm paying them back through the refinance of the property. I'm going to release some equity and I'm going to pay them back. Again, this could be considered in your discounted cash flow forecasts. And this is why it's such a powerful tool apart from anything else. And as I say, this is the stuff that they use at the much bigger business level, but there's no reason why we all can't use it as property investors. I don't know why it isn't popularised in the industry. I know it's not as easy as some of the other concepts that are out there, but I promise you it's worth spending the time and effort on trying to understand this stuff. And then the key, of course, is implementing it within your property business. So, thanks for listening. I'll be back tomorrow with another explainer video.